Hello and welcome to the Stamperia Coffee and Chocolate mini album tutorial series designed for Scrap and Create. If you are just joining the series, all of these products that I'm using here are linked in the description box below to the Scrap and Create website, where you can just click on those products to follow along. In today's tutorial, we're going to begin working on page 1. So I have my base page here, and I'm going to start adding some of the interactive elements, flaps, and pockets. The first piece you'll need to cut measures 5.5 by 7.5. Now on the 5.5 inch side, I'm going to score this at 1/2 inch on the right hand side. Then I'm going to take my corner rounder and I'm going to use my scalloped corners on the the left two corners. For the second piece, this measures 9 inches by 7.5 inches. On the 9 inch side, I'm going to score at 1/2 inch on the left hand side. Then I'm going to use my corner rounder on the right two corners of this piece. Next, I have a piece that measures 2 inches by 8.5 inches. On the 8.5 inch side, I'm going to score this at 1/2 and 8 inches. Then I'm going to take my scissors and miter these corners on these 1/2 inch tabs. The final piece measures 6.5 by 5.5, and I'm going to leave it just like this, no scoring and no cutting. For these two pieces, I'm going to fold on my score lines and ink just the fronts of these pieces. Then for these pieces, I'm going to fold on my score lines and I'm going to ink both sides of my larger pieces. On this piece, I did miter the corners on my 1/2 inch tab section. I'm going to take this flap and adhere this one here to the left edge so that it is like this. I will not glue all of these on camera, but I will show you this first one, how to do it. And if there's something that I need to show you on camera, I will. But these tutorials are designed for you to pause the video to complete the steps while I do them off the camera, since a lot of times this is just not interesting to watch. So I'm going to take my scored edge and I'm going to line this up with the left edge of my paper, making sure that the top and bottom edges are aligned as well. Hold this in place and use my bone folder to burnish this down. Now I'm going to open this up and burnish here on the inside as well to make sure that this is nice and flat and adhered really well. So now I have my first flap on. This will open to the left. On the second flap, I did the same thing. I mitered these 1/2 inch tabs and I'm going to place this here. And I'm just going to use my grid here and I'm going to place this 2.5 inches from this right edge. So you can measure and draw a line if you want to be able to place this exactly 2.5 inches. Or if you have a work mat like mine does that has a grid on it, you can just use it to help you to place your pieces. So I'm just lining this up at 2.5 inches and then making sure that the top and bottom edges are straight, and then I'm adhering this down here. Just like before, I will open this up and smooth this down from the back side. So now I have my smaller flap here and my larger flap here. Next, we're going to take our band and we're going to place this over here. So I'm going to be using my grid again for this step, and I'm going to place this 2 inches from my left edge. So I'm just going to be placing my adhesive on these 1/2 inch tabs. Make sure that your page is lined up straight. And then I'm going to just place this here at 2 inches and make sure that it's 2 inches on the bottom. And then I'm going to make sure that this is lined up top and bottom. I'm going to hold this in the middle and then I'm going to smooth this out so that it's a nice tight fit to my page. There's not a big gap underneath there. And I'm just going to adhere this down so that it's on my page. And then there is that band. Then I have my final piece and I'm going to be placing this here. And it's going to be 1 inch from the edge. And then I'm going to center this top and bottom. I am using my centering ruler to do this. So 3 3/4 of an inch on each side is centered. And then my piece is going to be 2 3/4 of an inch on each side. So once I have this centered, I am going to draw a line here and here. And then I'm going to draw a line straight down this side of my piece. And now I'm only going to add my adhesive in this section here. Then what I'm going to do is take my piece and line up the edge again with that mark down the left side and then the mark across the top and the bottom. I'm going to hold that in place and then adhere this down to the front of my belly band. So now I do have room behind that. And I have that room there. Flipping over, we're going to start on the back side. The first piece for the back of page 1 measures 8 1/4 by 7 1/2. On the 8 1/4 inch side, we're going to score this at 1/2 inch on the right hand side. And then I'm going to take my corner rounder and round the 2 corners on the left hand side. Taking my scissors, I'm going to miter these ends on the 1/2 inch tab. Then for my next piece, I need one piece that measures 6 1/2 by 5 1/2. On the 5 1/2 inch side, I'm going to score this at 1/2 inch along the top. Then I'm going to use my corner rounder on the bottom 2 corners and miter the 1/2 inch tab section. Then for the next piece, I have one that's 6 1/2 by 5 inches. On the 5 inch side, I'm going to score this at 1/2 inch along the bottom. And then I'm going to score this, or I'm going to use my corner rounder, I should say, on the top 2 corners. And then take my scissors and miter these 2 corners on the bottom. I'm going to fold on all of these score lines, then I'm going to ink all of my edges, and then we'll come back and add these to the page. Starting with the largest flap, I'm going to add my adhesive to my 1/2 inch tab section first. Now I'm going to take this flap and I'm going to add this to the right side, making sure that it is lining up the score line with the edge of the page, and then I'm lining up the top and the bottom edges. Then I'm going to smooth this down to adhere it to my page. Then I'll open this up and burnish this down. Once this piece is on, I'm going to use my centering ruler, and on the flap that I just put on, I'm measuring 3 7/8 inches from the center, and then I'm going to mark, I've already done mine, I'm going to mark it 3¼ inches from center. Now, if you are measuring over from the edge because you are not using a centering ruler, you're going to measure over 5/8 of an inch. I did this at the top and the bottom, and I made marks so that I know where to place these next flaps. Taking the larger of the two, I'm first going to apply my adhesive to my 1/2 inch tab section. And then this flap, I'm going to be adhering to the top of my page. So I'm going to line up the edges where that mark is. Make sure that the top is straight. The score line is straight across the top of the page. Then I'm going to adhere this down. Now I'm going to take my second flap. This is the smaller of the two. I'm going to apply my adhesive to my 1/2 inch tab section, and I'm going to adhere this one to the bottom, but I'm going to turn this because it's easier to do on camera upside down. So I'm going to adhere this in those marks, make sure that it is straight across the bottom, but before I adhere this one down, I'm going to close this to make sure that my flaps line up side to side. Then I'm going to press this one down and adhere this one to my page. So now we should have our two flaps that flip up and flip down, and then we have our large flap that flips over to the right. Later on, when we add our decorative paper, we will actually adhere this down. So this is a tuck spot, and we're going to place a photo mat in here, underneath here, that's going to hold this flap closed. So for now, that's it for the build for page 1. Next, we're going to start on page 2. So I have the base of the page I'm just going to set aside for now. I have 2 pieces that I've cut from my cardstock. Now I'm going to have you cut yours a little bit larger than mine. So I want you to cut your pieces to 5 inches by 6½ inches. On your 5-inch side, I want you to score this at 1/2 inch. Now mine are 1/4 inch smaller than yours are, so I'm only going to have a 1/4 inch piece here. So just ignore that when you do your piece. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other piece, and I'm going to score this on the opposite side at 1/2 inch along the 5-inch side. So once you have your pieces scored, go ahead and take your scissors. On your 1/2 inch tab section, I want you to miter those corners. And then on the opposite ends, I want you to use your corner rounder on both pieces. For the next piece, we need to cut one to 9 inches by 6½ inches. On the 9-inch side, we're going to score this at 4½ inches. Then on the larger section, I'm going to round these 2 corners using my corner rounder. I have another piece that measures 9 inches by 2¼ inches. On the 2¼ inch side, I'm going to score this at 1/2 inch. Then I'm going to use my scissors to miter those corners on that 1/2 inch piece. Then I have one piece that measures 4¼ by 6¼ and I'm going to leave it as is. Now I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to ink around the edges on the front and back side. I'm going to ink around the edges of this piece, but I'm not going to ink this part because it's going to be like this as a booklet. I'm only going to ink the front edges of this piece, and I'm going to ink both edges of this side of these 2 pieces. To place my flaps on the front of page 2, I'm going to use my centering ruler again. So 3 3/4 from center. I'm going to take my flap that has my tab on the left-hand side. Now remember, yours will be larger, it's a 1/2 inch, but we're going to place it the same exact way. So I have marked my center here, 3 1/4 inches up and down from the center, so I know where to place my flap. So you want to put adhesive first on the back of your 1/2 inch tab section. And then you're going to line this up 3 1/4 inches, 3 1/4 inches from center, or if you are coming down from the bottom, it's a 1/2 inch. Once I have my score line lined up with the side of the page, I can go ahead and adhere this down. And then I'm going to come in here and adhere down the flap from the inside. And then next, I'm going to take my flap with my tab on the right-hand side, and I'm going to line up these edges, so top and bottom. You can also bring your ruler over here. So lining up at 3 3/4 inches, and then here, adding a line at 3 1/4 and at 3 1/4, so you know where this goes to line it up in center. So we're going to add our adhesive to the 1/2 inch tab section. Now I'm going to take my flap and line these two flaps up in the center so that they are not overlapping. And then I'm going to place this here on my page. So that everything is straight. Then I'm going to adhere this down. Then I'll open this up and burnish this from the back side. And I'm going to go ahead and erase these pencil marks so that they are not able to be seen later when we put the decorative papers on. Next, I'm going to use my centering ruler here, but it's not going to be with the page, it's going to be with these two flaps. So I have my 0 in the center. This piece is 6 1/2, so 3 1/4 inches, and I'm going to only be marking on my left flap at 3 1/4 inches top and bottom. Then I'm going to turn it this direction, and I'm going to center it with the flap, so it's 3 1/4 inches, and then I'm going to center it this direction, 2 1/4 inches. Then I'm going to draw a line down here, down this page. And you can also, if you want to, draw a line here and here and move this off. This is where the adhesive is going to go, because I'm going to adhere this to this front side. But I'm actually going to only be adhering a small section of this, and I'm going to make this a pocket on the back. So what I'm going to do is add my adhesive like this, just a thin line. Right across the top, the bottom, and the left-hand side. Now I'll take my piece and reposition this here where it needs to go. I'm going to open this up just so I can see this better and make sure that everything is lined up here and here. Then I'm going to adhere this down where that adhesive is. And I'll take my eraser now and just erase that so that you can't see that when we go in with our decorative papers. Opening up both of those flaps. Next, I have my 9-inch piece, and I'm going to stick this here between my two flaps first. I'm going to hold this in place, close one flap, and then close my second flap. Now my piece is closed fine without this puckering. If this piece is too large, then when you go to close it, it will start to pucker up like this. If that happens to you, I want you to take this piece out and just trim a little tiny bit off of the end until your pieces will lay flat like this. And when you close them, with this piece into that score line and this piece into this score line, everything is straight here. There's no pucker. So since I know my piece is good, I'm going to go ahead and apply my adhesive to my 1/2" tab section here, and then I'm going to adhere this down to my page. Now I'm going to make sure that the score line of this is lined up with the bottom edge of those flaps. So I'll just place this here first. And then I'm going to place this here. Again, I'm going to close this, make sure it's in place correctly. You'll see everything is in line. So I can go ahead and open everything back up and then burnish this down. Now this will be turned into a pocket or a tuck spot later, but for now we're going to leave it as a flap until the paper's on here, then we would adhere this down. Now this piece here is designed as a photo mat to fit in here, but if you want it to be stationary later on, you can go ahead and glue this down and then glue this down straight to the page. But for now, I'm just going to leave this in here, and I'm going to close up my flaps. Then I'm going to come here to the back side of page 2. The first piece for the back of page 2 measures 4 3/4 by 6 1/2, and we don't need to do anything to this piece, so I'm just going to set it aside. The next piece measures 6 1/4 by 7 1/2. Now on the 6 1/4 inch side, I'm going to score this at 1/2 inch down the left-hand side. Then I'm going to use my scissors on this side to miter those corners on that 1/2 inch tab. And then on the right 2 corners, I'm going to use my corner rounder. Then I have a piece that measures 6 1/2 by 2 inches on the 6 1/2 inch side. On the left-hand side, I'm going to score this at 1/2 inch. And I'm going to use my scissors on the 1/2 inch tab section to miter those corners. And then on the right side, I'm going to use my corner rounder to round those 2 corners. Now I'm going to ink both sides of these pieces, and I'm going to fold those pieces on the score lines, and then I will come back and place them on my page. I'm going to start with my larger flap, placing my adhesive on my 1/2 inch tab on the back, and then I'm going to use the grid on my mat again to line up this piece. So I'm going to make sure that the left side of my page is lined up, and taking this piece, I'm going to adhere this down 1 inch from that left edge. Now, if you don't have a mat like this on your work surface, just measure 1 inch over from that left edge. Place your piece down, make sure the top and bottom are both straight, and then adhere your flap to the base of the page. Once that flap is on, I'm going to take my centering ruler. I'm going to place it on my page here. Then I'm going to take this one and I'm going to place this in the center. So I'm going to mark this 1 inch from center on each side, then add my adhesive to my 1/2 inch tab section. And then I will adhere this right on top of the flap that I just placed down, making sure that the score lines are lined up nice and straight. Then I'll adhere this down, and then I'm going to burnish this to the page. Then taking my plain piece, I'm going to adhere this to this flap here. I'm going to use my centering ruler. I'm going to mark where this needs to go, and I'm going to come in 3/8 of an inch. I've already drawn my line there, and on this piece, I am going to apply my adhesive here. And I'm not going all the way down or all the way up to the top of this line here or all the way down to the bottom of this line here, because I'm going to put my background papers on, and I might need to get that background paper up underneath of there depending on how I cut it. So I'm just going to leave it open just a little bit, and you'll never know when the album is put together. So I'm just going to adhere this down. And then I'm going to come from the back side and adhere this as well. So then I have my flap here and my little closure piece here. My closure, my flap, and my flap. So this is it for page 2 and this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we will begin working on page 3. If you're just joining the tutorial series, don't forget to check out all of the links in the description box below, where you can purchase all of the Stamperia Coffee and Chocolate papers from the Scrap and Create website. I'll see you in the next tutorial.